So, if you at any point criticised lockdown in the UK and your tweet went semi-viral, not you, Carl, because of course
I wasn't on Twitter at that time.
Still kicked out of Twitter.
I was a strong lockdown critic, though.
Yes, well, cast into the wilderness with much gnashing of teeth. But for the rest of us, we might have ended up on a watch list. And it turns out that wasn't a conspiracy theory. Everyone thought the government might be spying on critics because they seemed to know at all times and all places where the lockdown protests were going to happen, and they got very heavy-handed with the grannies, but not with BLM. And now we have exclusive Telegraph reporting that they had entire behavioural monitoring units operating out the Cabinet Office. So this is the first exclusive that we have from the Telegraph, how secretive COVID units tackling COVID disinformation strayed towards censorship. And so I'm just going to go through some of the information today and see who exactly was targeted, which far-right extremists warranted them being on a watch list.
Just before we go on, Conservative government.
Yeah.
Like, if this was under the Labour Party, I'd be like, well, that's what I'd expect from those bloody Soviet apparatchiks. But this is the Conservatives.
Well, they've also passed the abortion buffer zone censorship,
the
online harms bill. They haven't done anything about Section 127. It should surprise nobody. No. And there are one or two dissenting backbenchers who speak up against this
Not
in
good
here.
Enough. Not good enough.
Sure. They've been marginalised, and so the government themselves
Go and join Andrew Bridgen.
Yes.
That's my opinion. I'm sorry, I'm not having it anymore.
I don't disagree. So in January 2021, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, very relative to censorship, assembled 21 men and women with the purpose, the chairman explained, of addressing the threat posed by COVID-19 mis- and disinformation. The CDU, which is the Counter-Disinformation Unit, began in 2019 to tackle disinformation related to the European and general elections. Those present at the meeting included senior executives working for Google, Facebook and Twitter, as well as the BBC and Ofcom, the broadcasting regulator in the UK that says what people can and can't say and will soon control the internet thanks to the Online Harms Bill. This is our equivalent to that Intercept piece that I covered quite a while ago with Harry in a segment called Biden's Watergate moment, around early November, where it was confirmed through a series of emails that Silicon Valley had a direct line to the Biden administration and the intelligence agencies as to which accounts and posts to censor or ban. And this seems to be pretty much the same thing, just operating in the UK. Yeah. A BBC spokesperson said the broadcaster attended the Counter-Disinformation Policy Forum in an observer-only capacity.
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, I somehow don't believe that. One, because, as you covered recently, again with Harry, they've got their new disinformation unit, which is going to be using Google Maps to counter the far right.
Yeah.
And also, if we remember the Trusted News initiative that was going on at the time of the pandemic to counter vaccine misinformation, it was spearheaded by the BBC, also involving Reuters, who had a former chairman of Pfizer on the Reuters board at the time.
Yep.
And both the BBC and Reuters were taking funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who were also funding Chris Whitty, who is the chief scientific advisor in the UK's School of Tropical Medicine. So you see how all the people that have money wrapped up here also have money influencing the narratives. Just don't trust you guys, but fine. There are also half a dozen academics and representatives of fact-checking organisations and lobby groups such as Full Fact and the Centre for Countering Digital Hate. Together they formed the Counter-Disinformation Policy Forum. We know they included Loughborough University's Andrew Chadwick and Will Moy, then Chief Executive of Full Fact, but only because of statements they've made elsewhere. So we don't know, even within these documents provided to the Telegraph, exactly who was part of this. We should have some accountability as to who is censoring us online, but we don't even know the full names. So what was discussed? There should be an emphasis on the importance of freedom of expression, the document states, and on transparency. Somewhat ironically, about a third of the 6-page disclosure is so heavily redacted it compromises pages of black. When shown the heavily redacted version by the Telegraph, Will Moy was aghast. On behalf of Full Fact, he said, "We do not believe that it was necessary or helpful to black out the notes of the meetings in this way." Then why not tell us the content of the meetings, if you're so committed to transparency?
Just release it then.
Yeah, or don't create a body dedicated to censoring the British public. Also would be a great idea. So they conducted all of this by outsourcing it to private sector contracts and AI. So the DCMS spent £114,000 with a firm called Disinformation Index at the start of the pandemic, and a contract with more than 1.2 million with Logically, a firm headquartered in Yorkshire, which claims to use AI to uncover and address misinformation and disinformation online.
Sorry, this really annoys me. I hate the terms misinformation and disinformation because they presume a kind of level of infallible knowledge about the subject upon which we're talking, which we know they don't have. Now, I'm not making any kind of commentary on COVID, vaccines, or anything like that. I'm just saying the standard, the epistemological standard of knowledge gathering that they are using is not very high because the information is still coming out.
Also, definitionally, they should not be used interchangeably, because misinformation means that it is incorrect information erroneously shared. Disinformation is deliberate propaganda generated by foreign adversaries.
Yes.
So if they're using them interchangeably, they're saying your nan on Facebook sharing a message about microchips, for example,
is a Russian agent.
Yeah. So they are conflating you with being a foreign terrorist. And have you ever heard of malinformation, by the way?
No, I haven't actually.
So that's a new one that's been baked into Joe Biden's AI Bill of Rights.
Oh, yeah.
And that is correct information misrepresented to achieve undesirable outcomes. So
really?
FBI crime statistics, for example,
That's
would be
very
malinformation. So if you tell the truth and it goes against the narrative...
Statistics are malinformation.
That's why they've stopped collecting them. Did you know that?
I did know that,
Yeah, so if you share the truth, but it upsets them, you'll be banned. Thanks. Cheers for that mask-off moment. Brilliant. Publicly available contact information suggests the CDU's monitoring program continued until at least April 2023. And that included helping to build a comprehensive picture of potentially harmful misinformation and disinformation. They also collaborated with Silicon Valley. So Caroline Dinniage, the former digital minister, told a committee of MPs in 2020 where potentially harmful content is identified, the CDU will flag that content to the platform to ensure it could be swiftly reviewed and acted on. She added that the government does not mandate the removal of any content, but of course, it's then arguable that if the government is telling you, a Silicon Valley body, to remove this piece of content while they're also legislating you with the online harms bill, you're more likely to comply to get favourable treatment by the legislators.
I mean, the mafia isn't mandating that you give them money. It's just really advisable.
Yeah, it'd be a shame if something happened to your platform, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
But they're also in contact with them, because it says also in this Telegraph article, a Twitter executive told Matt Hancock, special advisor in March 2020, we're also speaking regularly with the DCMS disinformation unit. Leaked WhatsApp messages show that over the months that followed, the health secretary, Matt Hancock, discussed the problem of anti-vaccine misinformation with Nick Clegg, the former deputy prime minister, who was then vice president of global affairs at Meta, Facebook. In November 2020, Hancock wrote to Clegg, midway through a roundtable meeting that the government was holding with UK executives from Facebook and other tech companies, I'm on a Zoom about tackling anti-vax with Oliver Dowden, the then culture secretary. His name will come up later. Obviously vital. Your team has been working really well with the department, and advertising ban is great, but we have to have a time frame of removal of anti-vax material and how to do that and demonetize it. Nick promised, I'll look into this. A month later, he sent Hancock another direct message. Matt, we're announcing further changes today. Basically, we'll now remove false claims debunked by public health experts about authorized licenses and vaccines. A spokesperson for Mr. Hancock said the information was in the public domain and directed readers to buy a copy of his book. So, if you're mad about us working with Silicon Valley to censor you because of questions you had about unspecified medical treatment, you can go and buy a book from the man that locked you in the house to find out about why he locked you in the house. I hate these people. They're awful. So we knew they were doing this a little while ago, actually.
The terms of service prevent me from commenting on this situation.
Yes. Yes. So a little while ago, this came out from the Daily Mail, and they were working with Big Brother Watch to release this information. So the Ministry of Defence's 77th Brigade had spied on critics like Peter Hitchens, Julia Hartley-Brewer, Toby Young, Adam Brooks, and sitting MP David Davis. So all of those far-right figures, of course. Papers show the outfits were tasked with countering disinformation and harmful narratives from purported experts, with civil servants and artificial intelligence deployed to scrape social media for keywords such as ventilators that would have been an interest. Ministers push social media platforms to remove posts and promote government-approved lines. Callum and Josh covered this in further detail before. If we go to this next one, you can go and check that segment out on our website for further information, a bit more of a breakdown. But if we go to the report that they mentioned in this, if we go to there, this is Big Brother Watch's Ministry of Truth report. And according to Big Brother Watch, they had 4 different units. This was the Rapid Response Unit, which was part of the Cabinet Office, we'll be mentioning that later, tasked with tackling a range of harmful narratives online. The Counter Disinformation Unit, which we've already mentioned. Also, in response to the war in Ukraine, the Foreign Office established the Government Information Cell, focused on identifying and countering Russian disinformation in the UK and abroad, and the Home Office's Research, Intelligence and Communications Unit, operating to push official lines that support counter-extremism. Now, I'm sure you remember, but when we reviewed the government's Prevent training, they included figures like Douglas Murray, George Orwell, and you. So if I don't trust them to define far-right and what constitutes an extremist, sue me, I suppose. I don't think these people have our best interests at heart.
At least I'm in good company.
Yes. Yeah. It could be worse to be associated with Orwell and Douglas Murray. There was also this leaked WhatsApp from the Telegraph, because they've been reporting consistently on this. This was one of the lockdown files, which we'll be going through at more depth later on. Matt Hancock had told people, and if we could scroll down to his WhatsApps, please, John, there's a screenshot in this file. He'd said, I think we're going to have to get heavy with police in enforcing lockdown measures, and then also
really?
suggested that because Nigel Farage had visited a pub, that he asked if he could arrest him. So just going out and arresting your political opposition, these were the kinds of people that were doing this. Who else was targeted? Let's go to this Telegraph piece again. Next one, please. So, people monitored included Big Brother Watch's Silky Carlo, who did the expose in the first place, Professor of Evidence-Based Medicine at Oxford University, Carl Hennigan.
Obvious person who needs to be monitored by the government.
Fringe far-right figures, again. Dr. Alexandra de Figueiredo, a research fellow at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and anti-school closure activist, head of campaign group Us For Them, Molly Kingsley. And we'll talk
Don't they realise
that
all the scientists agree? Don't they realise?
Yes.
Sorry.
No, don't apologise. It's really just absurd.
I just hate.
Well, again, we know about Dr. Fauci censoring the Great Barrington Declaration from people from fringe places such as Harvard, Stanford, and Oxford.
Yes.
Yeah, of course. Documents revealed that the material flagged to the CDU included articles published by The Telegraph. One of these was a piece by Miss Kingsley, published in February 2022, arguing it was indefensible that children's lives were still not back to normal while the rest of society was. One of Kingsley's tweets from December 2020, in which he said it would be unforgivable to close schools, was also passed on to the CDU. The RRU also logged articles by Professor Hennigan, published in The Telegraph and Spectator. In some cases, individuals whose social media posts were recorded by the units have subsequently faced sanctions by Twitter and Facebook. Oh, but the government isn't pressuring them to ban the accounts. They're just passing these posts along, and then if action gets taken afterwards, it's definitely not their fault.
Matt Hancock was texting Nick Clegg about it, so whatever.
Ministers denied asking for posts by Professor Hennigan, Dr. Figueiredo, or Miss Kingsley to be removed. Really? Interesting. A government spokesman said none of the people named in this report were ever referred to social media platforms by the government, and any claim otherwise is objectively false. But then Vaccine Minister, is quoted in this article, Nazim Zahawi, said he believed the government included de Figueiredo's tweet about children receiving the COVID-19 vaccine because of a cock-up rather than a conspiracy.
I mean, that's possible.
But hang on. The then Vaccine Minister says we included it in there. And then another government spokesperson saying none of these were ever passed on by the government to take action. So one of you's lying.
Yep.
And I'm more inclined to believe the former Vaccine Minister, who is also head of YouGov, possibly manipulating public opinion. And about the only good Conservative weighs in this article, it's Miriam Cates, as per usual. Any attempt by governments to shut down legitimate debate is hugely concerning, but to discover that the DCMS actively sought to censor the views of those who were speaking up for children's welfare is truly chilling. It's becoming increasingly clear that many of the foundations of democracy, such as free speech and parliamentary scrutiny, were completely disregarded during the pandemic. I mean, pretty fair and observable statement.
Demonstrably true.
Please do something. That's all I'm going to ask.
This is your party?
Yeah.
This is your party doing this.
When you're inevitably defeated, please lead the insurrection. Yeah. So if we go on to some of Kingsley's stuff, she's actually documented, if we see here the images, some of the terrible tweets that have got her in trouble, right? And as you can see there, it's just things like you shouldn't close the schools because it's going to harm children's learning.
Demonstrably true.
Yes. I would like to say...
Predictable in advance.
I would like to say most English schools are not up to snuff.
Yes, they're not very good anyway.
But she's speaking out on behalf of the children who use school and the pastoral care centres in there, which are actually good, and I've met people that do coordinate them, as a kind of refuge from their otherwise abusive homes. And we know for a fact, under lockdown, some children that were returned and locked in abusive homes with their abusers were abused until the point of death in some really tragic cases. And the lockdown was a cover for those abusive parents to say we can't have social services visit because we're quarantined because of COVID. So it's observable that the school closures, when the children were not at risk of dying of COVID proportionally, harmed many more children than anyone they would have saved.
Also, it's demonstrable that there have been loads of studies that have shown that children have been retarded in their education, obviously, because of this. Their ability to read faces because of masks, their ability to just do academic work, schoolwork, has been held back because of this. This is not secret knowledge.
Yeah, and also if you spend generations outsourcing the ability to educate your children to state apparatus and then foist it into the hands of otherwise well-meaning parents who also got to hold down the job at the time, they're not equipped enough. So some children, even if their parents were well-meaning, had them sat at home and weren't capable of educating them. So they've just lost out on years of education. It's a moral crime as far as I'm concerned.
I bet in 10 years' time we find that the average person has like a much lower reading age because of this.
Yes.
This is just
They've already found that of the kids that then went from primary school to secondary school straight after lockdown, they're reading a couple of years earlier than what they should have. It's awful. So Molly did an interview with the Telegraph, and she just said something, again, pretty tepid. This isn't an insult to her. It's just saying this is the scale of surveillance isn't warranted. Never warranted in the first place, personally, but warranted for the people they were looking at. She said, "I'm very open to spending the rest of my life making the government and all those involved in the decision-making around the pandemic more accountable to the people they serve. I don't believe this is a political framework that should be inherited by our children. Unless we correct the failings of this period, then we'll be stuck in the doom loop of bad decision-making."
She's right. And the title on this, if you can just scroll back up, John. I was cast as an extremist, but I've since been proved right. Well, hasn't that happened to a lot of us?
Yeah, we're not far right, we're just right so far.
Yeah, that's literally what, like, everyone I know is in that position at this point.
But that was the moderate position. It was like, putting everyone under house arrest might have some consequences.
Yeah.
Rolling out a unspecified treatment very quickly. Would that have any consequences whatsoever? No. Silence. We must.
Whatsoever.
We're not allowed to debate this issue. It's been settled. Trust the science. The science was slightly wrong, but we're not going to give you any money for
trust
how
the science,
your
but
life.
not those scientists.
Yes, exactly. Speaking of those scientists, if you subscribe to the website and pay us as little as £5 a month, you'll get this content, which will be blurred for YouTube because we're not allowed to show this content on YouTube. But if you're on Rumble or on our website, you'll be able to see this hangout where we discussed unspecified medical treatment. And the reason I bring this up is because in this video we discuss some of Us For Them's work. Us For Them have done some really good stuff. And at the time they submitted a complaint to the UK's Prescription Medicines Code of Practice Authority, the CPA, which is the regulator responsible for policing promotions of medicines on broadcast media, because we're nothing like the Americans. You can't just have everything sponsored by Pfizer in the UK, which seems to be a bit more sensible, actually. And they complained about Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla's statements on BBC News on the 2nd of December 2021 about the eligibility of children to receive unspecified medical treatments. And the PMCPA ruled in favour of Us For Them, saying that Pfizer had misled the public on the safety and efficacy of insert medical treatment here. So again, they've done some legislative work to move the needle. And all they're saying is, please tell the truth about relative cost-benefit ratio. And that landed them on a government equivalent to terrorist watch list.
It's just wild.
Yeah, we live in a Soviet state. Of course, Elon Musk was mortified by this. He just says terrible in response to Michael Schellenberger sharing the original Telegraph article. So at least we know until the WEF CEO steps in that we won't be getting this on Twitter again. Yeah. Again, I would question some of your appointments, Elon, but we'll see if that changes.
Very questionable.
Yeah, didn't she used to work for MSNBC?
Possibly. For me, it's the fact that she's the chair of one of the WEF high offices. What is this?
I think the intention was, because she also worked as a consultant for the Trump administration, that he's thinking she's a neutral appointment. But I don't think there's any neutrality when you're involved in the World Economic Forum.
No, I don't think so.
I just don't trust it as far as I would throw her. But
I'm sure she's brilliant with the advertisers, though.
Yeah, because they're all bought into ESGs, exactly. Shame. If we just go to the next one, it turns out that lockdowns are actually worse than doing nothing at all. So we now have 2 landmark studies releasing around the same time. And this is from Johns Hopkins University academics and London University academics. This was first published in the Telegraph. They conducted a meta-analysis of 19,646 studies on measures taken to protect populations against COVID, and this is worldwide. They found the difference in mortality amounted to just 3.2%, or 1,700 deaths in England and Wales.
And we have countries that didn't do lockdowns, such as Sweden, to use as test cases against this.
They use that in here.
Yeah.
They actually say that their findings suggest lockdowns in response to the first wave of the pandemic, when compared with less strict policies adopted by the likes of Sweden, prevented as few as 1,700 deaths. So we have way more of those dying from missed cancer screenings, unconducted surgeries that were necessary but delayed because of COVID, of suicides, of if you add the abused and murdered children in there that we spoke about before, this was not proportionate. This was horrendous, inflicted upon the most vulnerable people who needed freedom and protection, and yet we weren't allowed to debate it. And if you tried to, you were put on a watch list or cancelled by Ofcom, as was regularly the case on many, many outlets. So they found that even a broader definition of lockdown was used, estimates suggested that it only reduced COVID deaths by 10.7%, 6,000 deaths at maximum, 23,000 deaths in Europe, and 16,000 deaths in the US during the first wave. That was obviously the most deadly. Over the period, in total, there were 74,000 COVID deaths in England and Wales. So what's that? About maybe 10% it shaved off.
And the thing is, we were never asked. It was never the. I mean, and these would be predominantly people 70 and over. And if you'd asked them, right, okay, so we're going to damage your grandchildren's prospects to make sure that there's a lower chance of you dying of COVID, they wouldn't have consented to it.
No, but both sets of my grandparents have said exactly the same thing.
They would never have consented to it.
They said they've destroyed the country and future prospects of people my generation and younger for an ineffective policy, I think we can say.
But even given it as most charitable, it's like, look, you'll live a few more years. They'd still say no.
Yeah, and the lives saved, even the people that have authored this report said it's less than those of a typical flu season, which claims between 18,500 and 24,800 deaths. They say explicitly the benefits of the policy were a drop in the bucket compared to the staggering costs, and conclude with the science of lockdowns is clear, the data are in, the deaths saved were a drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
So, unreasonable. You can read the full report as it's just been released yesterday. If we go onto the IEA's website, that's there for you to consult in your own time. But I think the summary serves as a damning indictment in and of itself. And we also have findings from the US, which I found were quite interesting. They released around the same time in The Lancet, if we go to this link. So they looked at all of the measures across all the states.
Just say The Lancet was being leveraged as a tool to encourage lockdowns.
Well, can we scroll down slightly, John, to the funding section just beneath background? It's under methods. Keep going. Funding. There we go. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
There we go.
So, but
Bloomberg Philanthropies, all right.
Yeah.
But I remember very clearly during the pandemic, The Lancet was literally putting up fake news.
Bankrolled by Peter Daszak of the EcoHealth Alliance.
Yeah.
So this paper is quite interesting, though, because they allow some truth to slip through the wording.
Right, okay.
So I'll just read. Quote, the political affiliation of the state governor was not associated with lower COVID-19 infections or COVID-19 death rates, but worse COVID-19 outcomes were associated with the proportion of a state's voters who voted for the 2020 Republican presidential candidate. So the smear job is already in full works. Doesn't talk about breakdowns by population density or age of population, for example, because Florida had way more retirees, but that's fine.
Yep.
State governments' use of protective mandates were associated with lower infection rates, as were mask use, lower mobility, and higher vaccination rate, while vaccination rates were associated with lower death rates. Did you catch that wording?
Were associated with?
Yeah, but it says here, again, mask mandates and stay-at-home orders were associated with lower infection rates, but only the vaccine was associated with lower death rates.
Oh.
So the infection number, which didn't really matter because if you're infected and survived, it's fine, that was associated, having been lowered by having everyone stay at home. But lowered deaths were only associated with the vaccine rollout, which, of course, Bill Gates has absolutely no financial interests invested in. So they even have to let slip in here that, well, the lockdowns and mask mandates, they didn't really save any lives.
Cunningly worded, though, isn't it?
Very, yeah.
Cunningly worded.
It later says that mandate propensity, a summary measure that captures a state's use of physical distancing and mask mandates, were associated with a statistically significant and meaningfully large reduction in the cumulative infection rate, but not the cumulative death rate. All three behavioural responses to COVID-19 were statistically associated with lower cumulative infection rates, whereas only vaccine coverage was statistically associated with lower cumulative death rates. So, trying to say there was a higher death toll associated with voting for the Republican candidate is trying to make you think that because Republicans didn't put strict COVID measures in place, that caused death rates. But that's not the case.
No.
It wasn't because of Ron DeSantis' abstinence from lockdowns after the first couple of weeks that more people died. It was possibly because of an individual choice of lower vaccine uptake. But they're still trying to smear people with the association that you didn't lock down hard enough, even though lockdowns didn't save lives. Again, the framing is from the interested parties like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Bloomberg, but the evidence speaks for itself. It didn't help. And so, I thought I'd finish on what would the consequences be for all of this. Well, in the UK, Oliver Dowden, remember? Head of Digital Media, Culture and Sport? Head of this monitoring system? Yeah, he's now Deputy PM. Failing upwards. Telegraph understands that Michelle...
It's amazing how many people do, isn't it?
Yeah. Matt Hancock, for example. Completely evaded accountability and actually got Andrew Bridgen thrown out the party for defamatory charges.
Rishi Sunak himself. Wasn't exactly a sterling Chancellor of the Exchequer, was it?
No, destroyed the entire economy. Or Jeremy Hunt, who endorsed having Chinese-style lockdowns because his wife works for the Chinese Communist Party. The Telegraph understands that Michelle Donnellan, former Universities Minister and also very brief Education Secretary, who was Mr. Dowden's eventual successor, tried to have the CDU shut down after she took the Department of Culture role in September last year. She was uncomfortable that the unit was flagging social media posts by citizens that were neither disinformation nor misinformation. Ms. Donnellan, who's currently on maternity leave and isn't in Parliament, raised concerns with officials at the meeting after she took the post. A source said she thought the unit should be replaced or stripped back so that it focused solely on foreign material and disinformation. That seems sensible. It's not that I trust them to properly handle what is foreign disinformation.
No, but at least it's a reasonable mandate.
It's a reasonable idea to protect your country from propaganda from abroad, definitely. Unfortunately, it's staffed with a bunch of the Westminster blob types who hate the country, but in a better time with better people, it would be a more sensible thing to do. But she didn't manage to do this because, again, we know that it was operating until April last year and it was still monitoring British citizens. And then Nadine Dorries, who oversaw the unit directly after Mr. Dowden and before Ms. Donnellan, told the Telegraph she was aware of the CDU and had been briefed on it, but that she never saw the people who were a part of it. So you're either lying or so incompetent that you weren't doing your job properly because you didn't show up to the meetings, right? Bear in mind, she's now got a Friday night show on Talk TV. These people fail upwards. And I'd just like to finish on Isabel Oakeshott's interview. We're not going to watch a clip from this, you can watch it in your own time, with Judy Hartley-Brewer about all this, because she discussed how she found those WhatsApps from Matt Hancock. They were passed on to her when she was
the one who released them,
Yeah, she's a very good journalist, and I've met her once. She was sat on defending young men on the Piers Morgan show. She's a nice woman. And she said at the end that, so Baroness Hallett is doing the COVID inquiry at the moment, and Baroness Hallett wants to see all of the WhatsApps from every minister, not just the ones she's leaked, but from everyone's phone. Parliament have appointed a judge which has interceded to try and block the admission of any private communications.
Very interesting.
What are they afraid of? That's my question. And so Isabel is saying there's a current battle over transparency here, and she is concerned that the judge will reign supreme over Baroness Hallett's intention to have a transparent inquiry. And so I don't wish to piddle on anyone's parade, but it does look like, because there are so many vested interests, so many guilty parties here, pretty much every politician voted for lockdown, loads of them voted for vaccine passports, loads of them doubled down on the COVID narrative, that getting accountability from anyone, even some of the Conservatives who might be more on our side, such as Sir Desmond Swayne, it's kind of difficult because reputations are on the line.
They're going to get away with it.
Yeah. So, sorry to give you a bit of a miserable segment, but just thought you should know the government might be spying on you.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the premium videos we do, this one on why liberalism is a universal asset. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.